Wyoming Territory, 1877. The wind howled across the plains like a lonely wolf, rattling the weathered boards of Warren Adler's modest cabin. At 25, Warren had already spent more years than he cared to count in solitude, convinced that a man's only reliable companions were his horse, his rifle, and his wits. The harsh realities of frontier life had taught him early that attachment was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with winter storms that could freeze a man solid, not with cattle that needed constant attention, not with the unpredictable nature of the territory itself. "The only promise worth keeping out here is the one you make to yourself," Warren muttered as he stoked the fire against the gathering storm. His father's words, spoken before the consumption took him 3 winters prior. Stay alive. Stay free, stay alone. Warren had built his small ranch with his own 2 hands, 15 miles outside the growing settlement of Pine Creek. He preferred the company of his cattle and horses to that of most people in town, visiting only when supplies demanded it. Loneliness wasn't a burden when you convinced yourself it was a choice. Outside, the early autumn storm intensified. Warren added another log to the fire and settled into his chair, a book of poetry open on his lap, his one secret indulgence. The howling wind masked the sound at first, but then it came again, a distinct pounding on his door, desperate and insistent. Warren's hand instinctively moved toward his rifle before he crossed to the door. No one traveled in weather like this unless death itself was at their heels. The woman who stood shivering on his porch looked half frozen, her wedding dress soaked through and mudded at the hem. Her blonde hair, fallen from what must have been an elegant arrangement, clung to her pale face in wet strands. Despite the dirt and desperation, she was strikingly beautiful, with eyes the color of summer sky. "Please," she said through chattering teeth. "I need help." Warren hesitated only a moment before stepping aside. "Come in, miss, you'll catch your death out there." She stumbled past him, drawn to the fire like a moth to flame. Her dress, expensive by the look of it, hung heavy with rain and mud. Up close, he could see she wasn't much more than 20 years old. "My name is Winifred Hayes," she managed, her voice surprisingly steady despite her trembling body. "My stagecoach overturned 5 miles back. The driver and the other passengers continued on foot to town, but I couldn't keep up. I saw your light." Warren frowned. "You're dressed for a wedding, not travel." A flash of something, pain, anger, perhaps both, crossed her face. "I was to be married today in Pine Creek. My fiancé arranged everything." Her chin lifted slightly. "I'm no longer continuing to that destination." Understanding dawned, a runaway bride who'd found herself in even worse circumstances. Warren didn't need her troubles, didn't want the complications of harboring a woman clearly fleeing something or someone. But the storm outside had turned vicious, and whatever her story, she'd freeze to death before morning without shelter. "You can stay until the storm passes," he said finally, moving to a trunk where he kept spare clothing. "These will be too large, but they're dry." He handed her a flannel shirt and woolen trousers, then gestured toward the single bedroom. "You can change in there, I'll make some coffee." When she emerged minutes later, Warren nearly dropped the coffee pot. Despite the oversized clothing, there was something striking about her, a quiet dignity, a resolute look in her eyes that spoke of decisions made and consequences accepted. "Thank you, Mr. Adler." "Warren Adler." "Mr. Adler. I won't impose longer than necessary." Warren poured the coffee and handed her a cup. "The storm's not giving you much choice, Miss Hayes. It sounds like it's settling in for the night." "Please call me Winifred." "Or Winnie." She accepted the cup gratefully. 22 years old, and I've never been in a situation quite like this." "Few people have," Warren replied dryly. "It's not every day a bride in her wedding dress appears at my door during a storm." For the first time, a small smile crossed her face. "I imagine not." As the evening wore on, Warren learned that Winifred Hayes had traveled from Boston to marry a man she'd met only twice, a businessman from Pine Creek who had courted her through letters arranged by her father. "I was supposed to be the solution to my family's financial troubles," she explained, staring into her cup. "Edward seemed kind in his letters, but when I arrived yesterday and met him properly," she shuddered, "he was not as advertised. Older, crueler. I overheard him speaking to his friends about how he'd tamed his previous wives." "Previous wives?" 3 apparently all deceased under circumstances he described as unfortunate accidents. Her voice hardened. I refused to go through with it this morning. He was unpleasant about my decision. I fled, took the first stagecoach heading anywhere else. Then the accident happened. Warren listened without comment. Her story wasn't unusual in these parts, mail-order brides arriving to find harsh realities instead of romantic promises. What was unusual was her courage to flee rather than resign herself to her fate. "You're safe here tonight," he said finally. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what's next." As he made a pallet for himself near the fire, giving her the bedroom, Warren told himself this was temporary, a single act of decency that would end with the storm. He had no room in his life for a runaway bride with Eastern manners and delicate hands that had never known real work. He had cattle to tend, a ranch to maintain, and a solitary existence that suited him just fine. But as he drifted to sleep, he couldn't help but notice how the little cabin seemed less empty somehow, as if its rough-hewn walls held their breath, waiting for something neither of them could yet name. Morning came with clearing skies and awkward silence. Warren prepared a simple breakfast while Winifred, still in his oversized clothes, tried to salvage what she could of her ruined wedding dress. "I should return to town," she said, though her hands trembled slightly at the prospect. "I have a small amount of money, perhaps enough for passage elsewhere." Warren eyed her skeptically. "And go where? Back east?" "I can't return to Boston. My father made it clear there would be no place for me if I didn't follow through with the marriage." She straightened her shoulders. "I'll find work. I'm educated. I can read and write. Perhaps a position as a schoolteacher or—" "Miss Hayes," Warren interrupted gently, "a young woman alone in these territories, especially one fleeing a man like your former fiancé, it's not safe." Her expression hardened. "I'm aware of the dangers, Mr. Adler. I'm also aware that I have limited options, unless you're offering an alternative." The words hung between them, a challenge Warren hadn't expected. He studied her, this young woman with determination in her eyes and a spine of steel beneath her proper Eastern upbringing. Against his better judgment, an idea formed. "I need help with the ranch," he said finally. "Not permanently, but through the winter at least. You could stay here, earn your keep, save your money. By spring, you'd have enough to go wherever you choose with better prospects." Her eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "What kind of help?" "Cooking, mending, keeping accounts. I'm not much for paperwork." He gestured around the Spartan cabin. "As you can see, I haven't made this place much of a home. In exchange, you'd have shelter, safety, and wages." Winifred considered his offer, her gaze assessing both him and the cabin with newfound scrutiny. "You're a stranger, Mr. Adler." "As are you, Miss Hayes, but I reckon we're both decent people in a difficult situation." After a long moment, she nodded. "Until spring, then, as your housekeeper and bookkeeper only." Agreed. Warren extended his hand and she took it. Her grip was firmer than he expected, her skin soft against his calloused palm. "I should warn you," she added with unexpected candor, "I've never actually cooked anything more complicated than tea." Despite himself, Warren laughed. "Then we'll learn together, Miss Hayes." "We'll learn together." The first weeks passed in careful navigation of shared space and slowly establishing routines. Warren taught Winifred the basics of cooking over a wood stove, skills she tackled with the same determination she applied to everything. Though early attempts yielded burnt biscuits and questionable stews, she improved quickly, approaching each domestic task like a military campaign to be conquered. For his part, Warren found himself working harder than usual, rising earlier, returning to the cabin at regular hours. He repaired things long neglected, the sagging porch step, the drafty window, the leaky roof corner. Without acknowledging it, he began viewing his home through her eyes and finding it wanting. One evening, returning from checking his herd, Warren paused at the rise overlooking his small ranch. Light spilled from the cabin windows, golden against the darkening sky. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the unmistakable scent of baking bread. The simple sight pierced something deep in his chest, a longing he'd buried so thoroughly he'd forgotten its existence. Inside, he found Winifred at the table surrounded by papers, her brow furrowed in concentration, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She tied her blonde hair back with a piece of twine, and she wore one of his old shirts with her dress skirt, the sleeves rolled up numerous times to free her hands. "Your accounts were in terrible condition," she announced without preamble, "but I've sorted them now. You're actually doing quite well, considering." Warren hung his hat and coat. "Considering what?" "Considering you apparently keep financial records the way most men keep fishing stories, loosely based in reality with significant exaggeration." Her eyes sparkled with unexpected humor. "You're not poor, Warren Adler, you're simply disorganized." He should have been offended. Instead, he found himself laughing, a real laugh that seemed to startle them both. "Is that fresh bread I smell?" Pride straightened her posture. "My third attempt today. The first two were better suited for building material than eating, but this one seems promising." That night they shared warm bread with honey, a simple meal that somehow felt significant. As Winifred described her efforts to organize his chaotic records, Warren realized he'd spoken more words in the past hour than he typically did in a week of solitude. More surprising still was the discovery that he didn't mind. As autumn deepened, their cautious coexistence developed unexpected rhythms. Warren found himself sharing stories of his cattle, the challenges of ranching, the beauty and harshness of Wyoming's landscape. Winifred absorbed everything with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed both her Eastern perspective and her quick intelligence. "Why choose this life?" she asked one evening as they sat before the fire. "All this isolation and hardship when you could have stayed in a more settled area." Warren contemplated the flames. "My father brought us west when I was 10, said a man could build something that was truly his, not beholden to others' rules or expectations. After he died, I could have sold up, gone somewhere easier. But this land," he gestured vaguely toward the window and the unseen landscape beyond, "it gets in your blood. Even with all its dangers." "Maybe because of them," he looked at her thoughtfully. "What about you? What would you have chosen if your father hadn't arranged that marriage?" Winifred's expression softened. "I always wanted to teach, not just reading and numbers but poetry, history, ideas. I wanted to show children, especially girls, that their minds matter." Her fingers traced the spine of one of Warren's books. "I never expected to find a cowboy with a collection of poetry and philosophy." "My mother's doing," he admitted. "She believed even frontier children deserved culture. She read to us every night until consumption took her when I was 15. "I'm sorry," Winifred said softly. "It was a long time ago." "Yet you kept the books." Warren didn't answer, but something shifted between them that night, a recognition of shared wounds and unexpected commonalities bridging their different worlds. The first heavy snow came in early November, blanketing the landscape and isolating the small ranch further. Warren worked from dawn to dusk, securing his cattle, reinforcing shelters, and stockpiling firewood. Winifred threw herself into making the cabin more efficient, organizing supplies, patching drafts, preserving what food they had. When Warren returned one evening, half frozen after hours in the bitter cold, Winifred met him at the door with urgent concern. "You're practically blue. What were you thinking, staying out so long in this weather?" Without waiting for an answer, she helped him remove his frozen outer garments, pushed him toward the fire, and pressed a cup of hot coffee into his stiff hands. "The cattle," he began, "will not benefit from their owner freezing to death," she finished firmly. She knelt before him, removing his boots and chafing his ice-cold feet between her warm hands without a trace of self-consciousness. "Your feet are like ice. We need to warm you properly." Warren stared down at her blonde head bent over his feet, her efficient movements so at odds with the genteel Boston lady who had appeared on his doorstep. Something warm and dangerous expanded in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire or coffee. "You sound like you care what happens to me, Miss Hayes," he said, attempting lightness despite the emotion tightening his throat. She looked up, her blue eyes serious. "I do care. I would think that obvious by now." The simple honesty of her response left him speechless. She continued rubbing circulation back into his feet, her touch practical yet somehow intimate, breaking down barriers he'd constructed over years of solitude. That night, as the blizzard raged outside and they sat close by the fire, the usual careful distance between them seemed to have diminished. Warren found himself telling her about his younger brother who had died of fever at 17, about the fiancée who had decided Wyoming was too wild and returned east, about the years of choosing isolation rather than risking loss again. I convinced myself I preferred solitude, he admitted, that needing no one meant nothing could hurt me. Winifred listened, her eyes reflecting firelight and understanding. And now, Warren studied her face, the strength in her delicate features, the resilience that had carried her from a Boston drawing room to a frontier cabin. Now I'm not so certain. She reached across the space between them, her hand covering his. I was taught that a woman's worth lay in making an advantageous marriage, in being decorative and compliant. I never imagined I could survive on my own, make my own choices. Her fingers tightened around his. I'm not the same person who arrived on your doorstep. Neither am I, Warren admitted quietly. They remained like that, hands joined, as the fire burned low and the storm sang its wild song around the cabin walls. The next morning, Warren woke to find Winifred already dressed for the outdoors, wearing his spare coat and hat. Teach me, she said simply, about the cattle, the ranch. I want to help, really help, not just with housework. He started to object, to explain that ranch work wasn't suitable for someone like her. The determined set of her jaw stopped him. I'm not made of porcelain, Warren. And will manage better if I understand all aspects of this place. So he taught her how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to distribute feed, how to repair simple damages to the fences and outbuildings. She listened attentively and worked without complaint, her slender hands growing calloused, her fair skin weathering in the harsh winter air. One afternoon, returning from the north pasture, they spotted riders approaching, 3 men Warren didn't recognize. Get inside, he said quietly, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. Lock the door. Winifred hesitated only briefly before complying. Warren positioned himself casually near the corral fence, rifle accessible but not threatening. The lead rider, a heavy-set man in an expensive coat, reined in his horse. His gaze swept past Warren to the cabin behind him. Looking for something? Warren asked evenly. Information, the man replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tracking a young woman who disappeared from Pine Creek couple months back. Blonde, pretty, my fiancée, actually, ran off before our wedding. Thought she might have passed this way. Ice formed in Warren's veins. Edward Calloway it had to be, the man Winifred had fled. Haven't seen any travelers since before the first snow, Warren replied. Not many women wandering alone in these parts, especially not in winter. Calloway's eyes narrowed, studying Warren's face for deception. Shame, her family's mighty worried. Offering a reward for information about her whereabouts. Like I said, no travelers through here. The men exchanged glances, tension crackling in the cold air. Warren kept his expression neutral, his posture relaxed despite every instinct screaming danger. Nice little spread you've got, Calloway remarked, his gaze lingering on the cabin. Bit isolated though, trouble comes, you're a long way from help. I manage. After another long moment, Calloway nodded. We'll keep looking. You see a blonde woman named Winifred Hayes, you let folks in Pine Creek know. There's good money in it for you. I'll bear that in mind. Warren stood unmoving as they rode away, watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did he return to the cabin, finding Winifred white-faced by the window, his spare pistol clutched in her shaking hand. It was him, she whispered, Edward Calloway. Warren secured the door behind him. He's gone for now. He'll be back, he doesn't give up what he considers his property. She set the pistol down carefully. I've put you in danger. I should leave, draw him away from here. Warren crossed to her in 3 quick strides, taking her cold hands in his. You're not going anywhere, especially not alone in winter with that man searching for you. But your ranch, your safety. Mean nothing if purchased by sending you to a man like that, Warren finished firmly. We'll face this together, Winnie, I promise you that. Something in his voice, the determination, the unexpected use of her nickname made her look up sharply. Whatever she saw in his face caused her breath to catch. I'm afraid, she admitted. Warren squeezed her hands gently. That's reasonable, but you're not alone anymore. They stood close, the reality of shared danger creating a new intimacy between them. That night, though nothing in their sleeping arrangements changed, something fundamental had shifted. The pretense that Winifred was merely his temporary employee had evaporated in the face of a common threat. In the following weeks, they maintained vigilant watch while continuing the daily work of winter ranch management. Warren taught Winifred to shoot properly, spending precious ammunition on target practice until she could reliably hit a fence post at 20 yards. For her part, Winifred insisted on taking regular shifts watching the approaches to the ranch, refusing to be treated as someone who needed constant protection. Between these necessary precautions, life continued. Christmas approached, bringing with it a surprising lightness as Winifred decorated the cabin with pine boughs and made simple gifts from available materials, a new leather sheath for Warren's knife, mittens sewn from an old blanket. Warren rode to town for supplies despite the risk, returning with small treasures: real coffee, sugar, a ribbon for Winifred's hair, and a book of poetry he'd ordered months earlier. The simple joy on her face when she unwrapped the small package made every frozen mile worthwhile. On Christmas Eve, they sat before the fire drinking coffee sweetened with precious sugar, the cabin fragrant with pine. Warren watched Winifred reading her new book, her face animated as she discovered particularly beautiful passages. "Read one aloud," he suggested. She looked up, surprised. "Are you sure? Most men don't have patience for poetry." "I'm not most men." The words came out more intense than he'd intended. Winifred's cheeks colored slightly as she found a page and began reading in a clear, expressive voice. The poem spoke of finding unexpected beauty in wild places, of strength discovered through adversity. When she finished, the silence held meaning neither of them was ready to articulate. "Your turn," she said finally, offering him the book. Warren hesitated, then accepted it, finding a different poem. His deeper voice gave different texture to the words, a piece about transformation, about hearts opening after long winters. As he read the final lines, his eyes met hers over the book. "And so the soul that seemed abandoned learns that love waits in unexpected shelter, patient as the mountains, steady as the stars." Winifred's breath caught audibly. "Warren." Whatever might have happened next was interrupted by a sound outside, horses approaching through the snow. Warren was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, motioning Winifred toward the back room. "It could just be neighbors," she whispered, though they both knew better. No one traveled on Christmas Eve without dire purpose. "Hide. If anything happens, take the horse from the back shed and ride for the Jensen place 3 miles east." He pressed his spare pistol into her hands. "Don't hesitate to use this if needed." Before she could argue, Warren positioned himself beside the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. 3 riders, Calloway and his men again, their breath clouding in the cold night air. "Adler," Calloway's voice rang out, "come out and talk." Warren opened the door just enough to make himself visible, rifle ready. "It's Christmas Eve, Calloway. Whatever you want can wait." "Just some friendly conversation." The man's tone belied his words. "Been asking around town about you. Interesting what people say when properly motivated." Warren remained silent, waiting. "Storekeeper mentioned you buying women's things, ribbon, sewing needles." Calloway smiled coldly. "Odd purchases for a bachelor rancher, wouldn't you say?" "My business is my own." "Indeed it is, including harboring my property." Calloway's pretense at friendliness vanished. "Send her out, Adler." "This doesn't concern you. There's no one here but me." Calloway dismounted slowly, his men following suit. "I tried being reasonable, I really did." He drew his pistol casually. "The girl belongs to me by contract. Her father accepted my payment. You're interfering with a legal arrangement." "Women aren't property in Wyoming Territory," Warren replied steadily, "or anywhere civilized. Last chance, send her out or we're coming in to get her." Calloway cocked his pistol. "And then I'll burn this place to the ground with you in it." The first shot came from behind Warren, Winifred standing in the doorway, her borrowed pistol smoking. The bullet struck the ground near Calloway's feet, startling the men and their horses. "The next one won't miss," she called out, her voice remarkably steady. "I'm not property, Edward. I never agreed to marry you. Go back to Pine Creek and leave us in peace." Calloway's face contorted with rage. "You little—" Whatever insult he intended was cut short as Warren leveled his rifle. "She's made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it and leave." For a tense moment, violence hung in the balance. Then Calloway laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "You think this is over? I've got friends in this territory, powerful friends who don't take kindly to contracts being broken." he remounted his horse with deliberate calm. "Enjoy your Christmas, Adler. It'll be your last peaceful day." They watched the men ride away, neither speaking until the riders had disappeared into the darkness. "You should have stayed hidden," Warren said finally, closing the door. "And let you face them alone. That's not who I am anymore." Winifred lowered the pistol, her hands now trembling with delayed reaction. "They'll be back, won't they?" Warren nodded grimly. "With more men, most likely. What do we do?" He turned to her, taking in her determined stance despite her fear. "First, we celebrate Christmas, then tomorrow we prepare." "Prepare for what?" "For making a stand," he answered simply. Together, they spent the days after Christmas fortifying the ranch as best they could, moving cattle to the most protected pasture, stockpiling supplies in the root cellar, creating defensive positions around the cabin and barn. Warren rode to his nearest neighbors, the Jensens, explaining the situation and receiving promises of support if trouble came. Through it all, Winifred worked alongside him, her presence no longer a temporary arrangement but an essential partnership. In quiet moments between preparations, Warren found himself watching her, the confidence in her movements, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength she'd always possessed but only now fully embraced. On New Year's Eve, with no sign yet of Calloway's return, they allowed themselves a small celebration. Winifred prepared a special meal from their carefully rationed supplies, and Warren contributed his last bottle of whiskey, saved for an occasion that had never seemed important enough until now. As midnight approached, they sat before the fire, sharing the bottle and conversation that flowed more easily with each passing hour. "Do you regret it?" Warren asked suddenly. "Coming here, staying?" Winifred considered the question seriously. "I regret putting you in danger, but being here," she shook her head. "No, here I discovered who I really am when all the social expectations were stripped away. Here I learned I'm stronger than I ever imagined." "You were always strong," Warren countered. "You just never had the chance to see it." She smiled at that, the firelight gilding her profile. "What about you? Do you regret taking in a stranded bride who brought nothing but complications to your peaceful existence?" Warren studied her face, no longer able to imagine his cabin without her presence animating it. "My existence wasn't peaceful, Winnie. It was empty." Her eyes widened slightly at his candor. In the distance, a coyote howled, marking the hour. "It's midnight," she whispered. "A new year." "A new beginning," he offered. Winifred set down her glass and moved closer to him on the bench they shared. "In Boston, there's a tradition at midnight on New Year's Eve." "What's that?" Warren asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. Instead of replying, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tentative, a question rather than a declaration. When she pulled back, uncertainty clouded her eyes. Warren cupped her face in his hands and kissed her properly, deeply, thoroughly, conveying everything he hadn't yet found words to express. She responded with equal fervor, her arms encircling his neck, her body leaning into his as if drawn by some inevitable force. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "Why didn't you?" she asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Because you came here for safety, not romance, because I didn't want you to feel obligated." "Because—" She silenced him with another kiss. "I came here for shelter," she murmured against his lips. "I stayed because my heart found its home." In that moment, with snow falling outside and danger still lurking on the horizon, Warren allowed himself to believe in possibilities he'd long ago abandoned. Family, partnership, a love strong enough to withstand the harsh realities of frontier life. They spent the night together, their passion tempered by tenderness, discovering each other in ways both physical and emotional. As dawn broke on the new year, Warren watched Winifred sleeping beside him and made a silent vow that whatever came next, they would face it together. The confrontation, when it came, arrived with the first hints of spring. 3 months of vigilance had almost lulled them into believing Calloway had abandoned his pursuit. The ranch had thrived under their joint management, with Winifred's organizational skills complementing Warren's practical knowledge. They had settled into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing, their initial employer-employee pretense long forgotten. Warren was repairing fence in the east pasture when he heard the distant sound of multiple horses. He straightened, hand shading his eyes against the bright March sun, and counted at least 6 riders approaching from town. He mounted quickly and rode hard for the cabin, where Winifred was hanging laundry in the spring breeze. Her face paled when she saw his expression. "They're coming," she said. It wasn't a question. Warren nodded grimly. "At least 6 men. We have maybe 15 minutes. They moved with the efficiency of those who had rehearsed for this moment countless times. Winifred gathered their emergency supplies while Warren saddled fresh horses. They had discussed running, heading for the mountains where they could lose pursuers in the rugged terrain, but as the moment of decision arrived, Warren found himself hesitating. "This is our home," he said quietly as they prepared. "Everything we've built together is here." Winifred looked up at him, understanding in her eyes. "Are you suggesting we stay and fight?" "I'm suggesting we stop running from a bully who thinks he can take what isn't his." Warren took her hands in his. "But it has to be your decision too. These are your demons to face." She squeezed his hands, resolve hardening her delicate features. "I'm done running. This ends today." They positioned themselves strategically, Warren on the porch with his rifle, Winifred inside at a window with clear sightlines to the approaching riders. As the men drew closer, Warren recognized Calloway in the lead, accompanied by 5 rough-looking men who carried themselves like hired guns. "Adler," Calloway called out when they reached the yard. "I see you're still harboring what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you, Calloway," Warren replied evenly. "Turn around and ride away while you still can." Calloway laughed. 6 against 1, those aren't odds I'd bet on, rancher. 7 against 6, came a new voice as Jim Jensen and his eldest son rode into the clearing from the west, rifles ready. They positioned themselves beside Warren's porch, a clear statement of alliance. Calloway's smug expression faltered momentarily before he recovered. "This isn't your fight, Jensen." "When armed men threaten my neighbors, it becomes my fight," Jim replied calmly. "And the Petersons are just over that rise, watching. They don't take kindly to bullies either." It was a bluff. The Petersons were still too far to have been alerted, but Calloway hesitated, clearly recalculating his odds. Winifred stepped onto the porch then, standing tall beside Warren with steady hands and unflinching gaze. "It's over, Edward. I never agreed to marry you. There is no contract that gives you any claim to me." "Your father does not own me," she interrupted fiercely. "I've made my choice. I belong here now with Warren as his wife." The word hung in the air, surprising Warren as much as Calloway. He recovered quickly, moving closer to stand shoulder to shoulder with her. "You heard the lady," Warren said. "She's made her choice. Now make yours. Leave peacefully or start a war you can't win." For a tense moment, violence seemed inevitable. Calloway's face contorted with rage and humiliation. One of his men shifted nervously, hand moving toward his holster. Then the church bell from Pine Creek tolled in the distance, clear in the spring air. The sound seemed to break the spell. Calloway spat on the ground. "She's not worth dying for," he muttered, though his eyes suggested otherwise. "You can have the Boston bitch, but this isn't over, Adler." "It is over," Warren replied with quiet finality. "You come near my ranch or my wife again and I'll kill you. That's not a threat, it's a promise." Something in his tone, the absolute certainty, perhaps, finally penetrated Calloway's anger. He studied Warren's face for a long moment, then Winifred's, and whatever he saw there seemed to convince him. "Mount up," he ordered his men. "We're done wasting time here." They watched in tense silence as the group rode away, not relaxing until they had disappeared beyond the ridge. "You think he's really giving up?" young Jensen asked skeptically. Jim shook his head. "Men like that don't give up easy, but they do understand consequences." He turned to Warren and Winifred. "You two should come stay with us for a few days, just to be safe." Warren glanced at Winifred, who shook her head slightly. "We appreciate the offer, Jim, but this is our home. We're not being driven from it." After the Jensens departed, promising to spread word about Calloway's threats, Warren and Winifred stood alone on the porch, the tension of confrontation slowly ebbing from their bodies. "Your wife?" Warren asked quietly. Winifred's cheeks colored slightly. It seemed the strongest statement in the moment. "I apologize if I presumed." Warren silenced her with a gentle kiss. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. "Is that what you want, to be my wife in truth, not just in declaration?" More than anything, she answered without hesitation. These months together, you've become everything to me, Warren. This place, this life we've built, it's where I belong now. He took her hands in his, dropping to one knee on the porch they had repaired together. Winifred Hayes, will you marry me? Not because it's convenient or safe, but because I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They married 2 weeks later in Pine Creek, a small ceremony attended by their neighbors and the few townsfolk who had come to know and respect their unusual story. Calloway was reportedly seen boarding an eastbound train the day before, his humiliation finally outweighing his pride. Spring blossomed across the ranch, new life emerging everywhere they looked. Warren expanded the cabin, adding a proper second bedroom and a larger kitchen. Winifred started a small school for neighboring children who had no easy access to town education, her dream of teaching finally realized in this unexpected setting. On their 1-month anniversary, Warren presented Winifred with a deed, the ranch now legally in both their names. I never thought I'd find someone to share this place with, he admitted as they stood on their porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. I convinced myself I was complete alone. Winifred leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder, and I never imagined finding strength in a place so wild or love with a man so different from everything I was raised to expect. Regrets, he asked, his arm tightening around her waist. She smiled up at him, her face illuminated by the golden light of evening. Only that it took a broken engagement, an overturned stagecoach, and a terrible storm to bring me to your door. I'd call those fortunate accidents, Warren replied, kissing her forehead. They led you home. As darkness settled over the Wyoming landscape, the lights from their cabin windows glowed like beacons in the vast wilderness, no longer just shelter from the storm, but the heart of a future neither had dared imagine until they found each other.